Well, here we are again with another retro emulation handheld, the RGB20S from Powkiddy. Jesus, I hate their name. But let's keep going. You know what? Sure, I've been fairly harsh on many of these devices, and I do understand there is an audience for them. And yes, they nonstop release new revisions, like every few weeks to a month, whatever. But I kind of like this one. But as always, you have to have your expectations in check on what these things can actually do. So the company I received this one from sells two versions. One with the 64 gigabyte micro SD card with about 15,000 games, a little over that. And then they also have a 128 gigabyte one with a little over 20,000 games. So in this video, I'm taking a look at the 64 gigabyte version. If you're interested in this thing, link will be down below. Now, when I first unboxed this thing, I was like, man, this has way too much going on in a small space in the front of the device. It's fairly cramped up front. But when you turn it around, what the hell is this? 4 chunky-ass shoulder buttons lined up next to each other. It looks a little ridiculous. I mean, it really does, but it works. Now, if you have large man-size hands or extra-large man-size hands, this device will probably be a bit more uncomfortable for you. Now, I think I have average-sized man hands, and it's still a little awkward, but serviceable. Now, if you have baby hands, baby man hands, it'll probably be 100% fine. But you know what? Everything here, it feels okay. The buttons, D-pad, they all work fine. They all have like a decent feel to them. Now, they're not my favorite buttons or D-pad in the world, but maybe they're somewhere in the middle if I were to rank them. Like maybe a little above average, slightly. Like I have no issue using them besides it being cramped. I mean, I could perform moves in Street Fighter games using the D-pad just fine. So that's like a huge plus for me. So specs-wise, the handheld we got here is using the RK3326 chipset with 1 gig of RAM. We have a 3500 milliamp hour battery, and the system has a 3.5-inch IPS screen at 640 by 480 resolution, and it looks amazing in my opinion. The image quality is great. Has a nice vibrant quality screen in my opinion, and there's no issues with viewing angles. It's probably my favorite thing about the RGB20S. I mean, games just look great on this screen. And everything for the most part, we'll get more into the games in a second, but everything there's no issues with a lot of these games playing them. The way they look and perform, the screen really helps that. So, I mean, yeah, that's cool. So, the system here, it has a ArcOS, operating system with an emulation station build included that has about 20 consoles represented. Now, the setup that they included here, it looks mostly okay. This is one thing I do criticize often because the draw to buying one of these devices for many people is what it comes with stock, as just some don't want to bother editing the build or creating their own build, downloading stuff, or getting custom firmware. So for me, I always feel it's only fair to mention how the thing is set up. And here it does have some of those common issues that I mentioned in the past, in past videos on these types of devices. Like, there's weird names for games, hacks intermingled with the normal consoles instead of having their own collections, and not having a consistent look with the metadata and scraped artwork for games. But here it's not every system, and it's not as messy as others have been, to the point, where you can't find what you're looking for. The build is set up way better straight out of the box than most other similar pre-set up handhelds that I've taken a look at in the past, so that's kind of a plus for me here. It's not perfect, it's not to my level of, creating a build, but it's also it's not bad. It just could use some tidying up type of thing, scraping the rest of the artwork, because there are some systems where the artwork looks nice, the metadata is there, and then there's some where it's just a game list. Now, some of the game lists as well do have folders and whatnot, so that's a good thing, having some things organized, but going a little bit further, I think would have been a plus, right? Now, as far as the system itself goes, it's not going to be the most powerful thing out there, but, if you got those expectations in check, this thing runs a lot of stuff great, and the games look awesome with that screen. the quality of the emulation is fine. Like, there's no issues here. Now, for me, I was a little surprised with the performance here. You know, now I was kind of going into this with certain expectations of things not working, and I was kind of, you know, surprised. So, for sure, all of our 8 and 16-bit retro consoles and handhelds run great and look great. No issues there. It's usually when you get into that higher end stuff when we have problems. And, you know, it always makes me wonder why these companies even bother adding those systems games onto a handheld like this, especially when they don't curate the list, finding stuff that actually performs well. It's just, you know, it'll be a ROM dump. And there is a little bit of that here, as we do have some of those common problems that I just mentioned. Now, Dreamcast was a pretty big one here. The included games that ran, they just ran too slow to be enjoyable. Some not running at all. So, yeah, don't expect Dreamcast here. Now, the Nintendo 64 is another system with most of these handhelds that is going to heavily be hit and miss. Some titles may run okay, like the not as demanding ones, I guess, but a lot will run poorly. You know, I was playing like Wave Race 64, and it just stutters along. And there's a lot of games that perform that way. Sure, you could boot them up and play them, but they don't play the way that they were, you know, were intended to be played. So that's always something to keep in mind with systems like that. But moving into stuff like PS1, I mean, things run great on PlayStation 1. You shouldn't have an issue with PS1. It's a system that runs on everything, and it runs well. So no surprise here. PS1 is fine. I found no issues with PS1. I don't know how many times I just said PS1, but yeah, I have to push that. PS1 runs great on everything for the most part. But going beyond that, I saw they included PSP, and I thought, this isn't going to go well. These are going to run bad. But the games I tested out actually played without much issue. I was surprised. So here, it does seem like you can expect more out of PSP over the usual where they just put PSP minis that they dump onto these things. But also at the same time, I have to note, don't expect everything to work. I tested a handful of the PSP games that were included, and they ran without issue. But, you know, I just wouldn't expect everything to be that, you know, running that well. I'm sure there'll be something that you find out there that runs poorly. But, you know, like I said, everything from PS1 down is going to be good on this thing. And the games look great, you know, playing the handheld games, all that kind of stuff. It looks awesome, and a lot of these systems just run great. Like the vast majority of them do. It's not a powerhouse system here. Just play those retro games, and I think this one can be okay for that. I mean, there's a lot of options out there. But there you go. I mean, I don't completely hate this thing. I think it works fine for those systems I mentioned. And the screen, I keep mentioning it. The screen looks awesome. The D-pad, the analog sticks and buttons, they all work well. Just a little bit of a overcrowding on the front of the system, making it a little cramped just depending upon your hand size. You know, it wasn't the most uncomfortable design for me, but it looks weird, and the smaller form factor doesn't really allow much for, you know, the way of changing that with the orientation of buttons and whatnot. Like, you know, your A, B, X, Y buttons are already slimmed down a bit. So, yeah, I mean, do you really want them smaller? I wouldn't. The way they are seems to be the best that they could do here. And I'm okay with that. You know. It is difficult to keep up on all these emulation handhelds releasing all the time, all these different revisions. And, you know, this one, it didn't really do anything revolutionary, but for some reason it did please me, you know, to a degree anyway. I mean, I think the quality of the screen and the D-pad working perfectly fine made me a bit more positive about this one, but there you go. To each their own, not going to be for everyone, but just sharing my honest opinions here. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.